and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now tonight we have a 1-hour special edition of Consider This to discuss Budget 2021, which was tabled in Dewan Rakyat earlier today. We're going to be hearing from different MPs and experts, and also our colleague Ibrahim Sani from Notepad with Ibrahim Sani will be joining us in different segments throughout the show to take a look at the different tax incentives that have been announced. Now our first guest tonight is Sharil Hamdan. He is the Information Chief of UMNO. Sharil, good evening. Now, were UMNO's ideas and suggestions taken into consideration in this budget? I'm just wondering because, while you support the Perikatan Nasional Government, I'm wondering whether this budget reflects your party's thinking about what the government should be doing at this juncture of the pandemic and the global recession.
I think in short, yes, there were elements in the budget that reflected specific requests that the party asked for, or at least representatives of the party did. For example, stuff around the withdrawal from account 1 of EPF, and perhaps more importantly, the increase in transfer payments especially to B40. I think those are the couple of things that come to mind. That reflect the spirit of what I think Berita Nasional pushed for.
Was there any elements, suggestions not taken up that you feel in any way weakened this budget as a budget that was much talked about in terms of the need for bold ideas?
So definitely there were things that I wish were in there, and on a personal note, I've been pushing for something approaching a job guarantee program, which the closest element in the budget reflecting that was perhaps the short-term contract jobs. I can't, for the life of me, can't remember. My Step, I think that's what it's called, which approaches the idea of a job guarantee, or the public sector creating jobs for the unemployed. But I think overall, was this budget bold? No. Was it too weak? No, either. So it's almost in keeping with the incrementalism that Malaysia is used to. So on a personal note, I have some disappointment, but also hopeful that implementation of some of the new initiatives can lead to good outcomes.
So you were hoping for a bold budget, and as many of us were, because this is a time of a pandemic. What do you think stopped the government short from a bold budget?
I think just institutional inertia. To do things that were outside the box in really meaningful ways, and that meant, for example, increasing the deficit far bigger than what it would be now. Doing things like public sector creating jobs or funding jobs for people, which is again something that's we're not used to doing. Thinking of issuing special sukuk, for example. Changing the laws to allow for Bank Negara to subscribe to MGS, for example. As long as the expenditure is useful and addresses the two biggest needs of the public right now, which is cash assistance and jobs.
Okay.
So unemployment and transfer payments are the two biggest things I think we're faced with, and this budget approaches those problems with incrementalist measures, which is okay. But it's not groundbreaking. All
right. Well, since you pointed out that as long as the expenditure is useful, can you weigh in on the fact that there's been some outrage over the increase in the allocation for JASA, the once defunct Special Affairs Department? It was 30 million in 2018. Now it's 85.5 million ringgit. That's a 185% increase. What justifies this amount going to JASA, which was once the propaganda unit that housed, I believe, an army of cyber troopers?
Yeah, so first things first, your specific question, why is it raised that much? I have the same question. I haven't seen any details as to why it would have needed that big of a budget. So the government and the ministry will have to come clean and explain why. In terms of JASA itself, if it remains or if it returns to being a propaganda unit for any party or government, I'm not for it. But if it plays a role that is needed in especially rural areas, doing on-the-ground programs that Jabatan Penerangan perhaps for whatever reason, aren't able to do, then I think it's okay. But 80 million sounds big to me, off the top of my head.
Yeah, and it's slightly more than actually what 8,000 employees of MAS will get. I think there's a 50 million support for them in terms of retraining and also finding jobs for them. But I want to come back to the jobs issue, Cheryl, since it's really something close to your heart. There was an announcement of a Majlis Pekerjaan Negara, and that's very interesting because on one hand it suggests that there's a concern about job creation, because here we see the creation of more bureaucracy, and I don't know what you think of that. I mean, do we need yet another agency?
I miss whether that agency was funded operationally. I hope not. If it's basically just ministers and civil servants getting together in an agency or in a majlis, that's okay. So that wouldn't cost us extra.
But what would they be doing differently? What would you have them do that they don't already do? What would be the remit, however it's funded, you think that majlis should have?
I think it should really think about creating jobs that the public sector funds. If all it's going to do is job matching, if what it's going to do is figure out what the skills mismatch is and do retraining, then I think your critique is fair in the sense that there are already other agencies doing that.
Right.
So why the need for this majlis? It will have to have a different remit. And if that remit is about identifying where the public sector can fund the creation of new jobs, perhaps in concert with my step, then that makes a bit of sense. But again, details are thin at the moment. Yeah,
I want to ask you very quickly, Sharil, about the young, whether this was a young people-focused budget. I know there have been some incentives, some transfers announced, but is this going to actually help young people in the areas that they need it the most?
So there's a long list of transfer payments, which I think is a return to the pre-PH days. So that's that bit that I think you'll find many BN supporters or BN leading folks are quite pleased about. And in that list of transfer payments, there are those that are quite specific to young people. But still, the biggest problem now is jobs. I'm not sure the Majlis Kerja, I'm not sure if my step with 50,000 jobs is going to cut it. So until and unless the implementation of this Majlis Pekerjaan leads to a reduction in unemployed graduates and unemployed young people, we can't say it's a success yet.
Cheryl, where would you like the conversation to go in terms of job creation? So let's say you were the Prime Minister and you had the right to kind of get government funding and creating jobs. Where would you create them? In an economy where the tourism sector has been obliterated, there are a lot of young people in there, aviation is obliterated, a lot of young people there too. Where would you create jobs? What kind of jobs?
First principle, number one, is save workers, don't save jobs. That's something we have to come to terms with. Yeah, sometimes you got to save industries, sure, but where they cannot be saved in the immediate term, it's really the workers that matter, right? So this retraining thing that they're doing with airline and tourism workers, fine. Let's see where that goes. But to your question, what would I do? I do the job guarantee. Where would I focus money on? I'd focus on building a more caring economy, and I'll focus on building a more green economy. And I'll create jobs that I'll create jobs that the private sector wouldn't otherwise create. So care economy could be something as simple as increasing elderly care for B40 and low-income families, so that it's not just rich elites who get to hire private nurses to come to the house when you have a sick elderly person in the house, right? So many times we've seen low-income families who have one parent who is maybe a stroke patient. The child will have to quit the job to take care of the parent, and I've seen this many times in my area. Right. So little things like that. And then perhaps more exciting things, how do we ensure the green economy becomes a norm in this country the next X number of years, say 10 to 15 years? There needs to be public funding in a big way to make buildings greener. any number of things around the environment and the green economy, which I think would justify a big fiscal injection, not just to create new jobs and therefore aim for zero unemployment, which we should, but also rebuild the kind of economy that Malaysia deserves.
Cheryl, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We appreciate your time. Now we're going to speak to another MP on the other across the aisle. We're joined now by Wong Chen, MP of Subang. Wong Chen, I know it's only been a few hours and everyone's still digesting all the announcements that were made, but let's talk about initial reactions. Did this budget take into account the proposals put forth by the opposition?
I think it partly did. I mean, they made mentions about, mental health, better treatment for women, domestic abuse issues. So those were some of the things that we touched on. But the 6 key drivers that we wanted the government to adopt, I think it adopted some. But again, everything is up to the details of it. So for instance, we asked him to spend more on development expenditure, on water supply, improving water supply in Selangor, Kedah, Kelantan and Pahang. We also asked for better fiberization of the internet connectivity. But then you go in and look at the budget itself, they've allocated a miserable 3.3 billion for those 2 areas, plus sewage, plus electricity supply. So until we get a proper breakdown, we can't really say whether this has adopted any of our real recommendations or not.
In view of that, I mean, what does it do for the federal opposition? I'm thinking Pakatan Harapan in particular, their sense of whether they're going to support this budget or not. I mean, was there a deal breaker? Was there something that, that you disagree so much with that it would make you refrain from supporting this budget?
No, I don't think it's a deal breaker. I mean, Guan Ning has come out and said that it could be a deal breaker, but then later on he went on to say that there are room for improvement, room for dialogue. I don't think that's the issue. For us, we would like to see the details. We use the debate period to really question where are these real, so-called adoption of our proposals. But the real deal breaker at this moment for me is the fact that the revenue model is very iffy and it's too optimistic. The fundamentals of a budget making is you have to be honest. You have to give proper projections of what 2021 could be. And once they've sort of, fixed the so-called revenue model, which is overtly optimistic, then the expenditure, that just makes a mockery of the entire expenditure exercise. So I think that's a more fundamental issue that we have to worry about.
And is that something that you're going to be debating, challenging in the next few days?
Absolutely. I mean, have you seen the corporate income tax data that they are presenting in terms of revenue projection? They're projecting to collect more tax than 2019, pre-COVID. I mean, I've not seen anything as ridiculous as this idea. There are also, 14 billion of assets that they will divest in order to pay for the budget. So you can't go around and say, I want to have the biggest budget ever, expansionary policy on fiscal policy, based on these assumptions which are blatantly not correct, in my opinion, anyway. So I will be picking on those points first, and then look at their actual expenditure. What do they want to do? It appears that, I was expecting a COVID-19 budget, which means we spend 40 billion, 50 billion on tackling COVID-19 via wage subsidy, some sort of social assistance handouts and stuff like that, being the bulk. But instead, we got a very small COVID-19 budget. This looks like, business as usual, is high OPEX, high DVAX. So I don't see the point.
Considering that revenue is likely to shrink on all kinds of levels for government, where do you think this money that you're proposing they spend, the bigger money, come from? In terms of what kind of borrowings would you like to see the government step up to, or be, feel brave enough to get into in order to fund this kind of level of budgeting?
Well, the government is they're restricted in their space, so-called fiscal space, because there is a basic rule they have to apply to, which is revenue must be higher than the operating expenditure, right? So you can go out there and issue 100 billion of bonds or sukuks, You can issue 150, 120, it's up to you, right? There are pros and cons of all this kind of thing, but I think in the COVID-19 situation, you have to expand for sure. But because of the rule that they cannot have revenue less than operating expenditure, the government has sort of come up with some creative style of budgeting. They've created this extra expenditure category, a hybrid of OPEX and DVEX, development expenditure, and they call it the COVID-19 fund, right? I don't have real quarrel about this issue. It's just that when they start projecting silly numbers and expect us to support this thing, I don't think that's right, you know? So please issue the bonds, issue the sukuks, but then the sukuks and bonds can only be used for DVEX. Come and tell us you want to use it for COVID-19. I support that. But don't come and tell us you want to, you know, pump prime the economy, because normally people spend less than 50 billion on DVEX. This year you want to spend 71 billion? You're not spending enough on COVID? I mean, come on, this is ridiculous.
Wong Chen, a few days ago we spoke to MP Fuzia Saleh, and she brought up that it's almost always the government of the day gets the budget that they want, the budget that they tabled. Is that the case? Is that going to be the case for this budget? Is this budget already locked in?
Well, the budget can change. There is no doubt about it. But that has to happen at the committee stage, right? But to do a committee stage change, which means each individual ministry goes through a change, is a bit difficult because you need to have a consolidated account eventually. So I think the process for change is quite difficult, but the government can do so, but they have to engage us very quickly. I just don't like the idea that we've been sort of semi-hoodwinked by these big revenue numbers. Then we happily make these fantasy numbers on expenditure and expect us to agree to this. I think it's just wrong, fundamentally.
Do you think that, you know, in the era of coalitions and the fluidity of coalitions that we have now, that we will see a much more vibrant debate in Parliament, much more negotiation, and perhaps the government of the day having to be more responsive to criticism and demands for either transparency, as you pointed out, or a shift in priorities?
I think the negotiations will not happen in the debate per se. It will happen behind the scenes. So they really have to get us talking very quickly, because once the debate starts, it becomes very formal and you can't get things done, because all the speeches go through and then the ministers reply them, then there's no room for negotiation. So I hope that parallel to the debate starting next Monday, that there will be separate negotiations between appointed MPs to represent the parties and try to sort something out so that they can table a white paper amendment before the vote happens on the November 23rd. Having said that, you know, politics keep changing every few days in Malaysia. At the moment, Perikatan Nasional seems to have full support of UMNO, so why do they need us anymore? I don't see the point, you see? Unless, of course, UMNO is not telling them the 100% truth or will not, you know, really support them at the end. That means that we really have to negotiate fast and quick and be honest.
Well, we'll just have to see what develops over the weekend then. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Wong Chen. We appreciate your time. We're going to take a quick break, and after this we'll speak to the former health minister for his take on the healthcare allocation in this budget. Stay tuned.
COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face mask, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah gelombang ketiga. Elakkan 3S, iaitu kawasan
Hello, you're watching Consider This. It's a special 1-hour episode to discuss Budget 2021. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan, and we've got Ibrahim Sani with us tonight with some tax updates. Ibrahim, what do you have for us?
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Sharaad. We have a few comments coming in from the auditors of the country. Here we have Jennifer Chang, tax partner of PwC Malaysia, sharing her thoughts on the budget.
So, windfall tax is basically a levy on a specific industry where economic activity has basically expanded and probably a lot of revenue has been earned. Now, Malaysia has actually levied windfall taxes in the past on certain sectors such as the palm oil sector. So there has been a lot of rumor about whether windfall tax will actually be announced this budget 2021 on the glove makers industry. What surprisingly was that the windfall tax was not announced at all, because to a certain extent, if you have the windfall tax, it could mean that the glove manufacturers may then consider expanding their business activities outside Malaysia instead of within Malaysia, and this will actually reduce the tax revenue collected from this industry. So, for example, the glove manufacturers are expected to pay about 2.8 billion ringgit in 2020 and 4.8 billion in 2021. So, if you add on the windfall tax, it will be a burden to the manufacturers. Instead, what has happened is that, and good to know, is that the glove manufacturers have actually supported the government by contributing 100 million each to combat the COVID-19. So definitely this is something that the glove manufacturers have done to support the government, on top of paying the taxes that they are paying for corporate income tax as well. Well, there has been rumors that GST may make a comeback, and there has been a lot of discussions about whether Budget 2021 will reintroduce GST. Obviously, there has been no announcement of GST, and it's very unlikely for GST to come in at this point in time until the economy has actually improved. Because at the end of the day, the GST will actually broaden the tax base for collecting taxes for the government, and at this point in time, the rakyat is basically suffering because of the COVID-19 pandemic. People have lost jobs, and so to a certain extent, what the government has done is correct in putting more funds into the rakyat's pocket through the Prihatin packages, as well as the ability to withdraw money from EPF and help them to tide over this difficult period. So very unlikely GST will come in for the next 1 year, at least until things have improved economically. Manufacturers are also given incentives up to December 2022 of a tax rate of between 0% to 10%, and this has also been extended to services sector. I think this is a very welcome incentive because it's trying to put Malaysia on the map and in trying to promote Malaysia as a hub for various multinationals to locate themselves in Malaysia, and hopefully this will create more jobs and activities in Malaysia. Interesting to note, of course, is that many people were wondering whether GST will be reintroduced, and that was not announced. But instead, the cigarettes industry, sin taxes, it will be considered as taxable goods in all duty-free islands, and there will be excise duty of 10% on devices for all types of electronic and non-electronic products as well. All in all, it is a budget that has actually taken into account of various sectors economically as well as the rakyat, a lot of initiatives, and hopefully this will actually support Malaysia to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic.
That was Jennifer Chang of PwC Malaysia. Back to you, Melissa and Sharaad.
Okay, thank you so much, Ibrahim. We're going to check back in with you a little bit later, but first, let's welcome to the show former Health Minister and Head of Selangor's COVID-19 Task Force, Datuk Sri Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad. Now, talking about this budget, the government has allocated close to 32 billion ringgit for the Ministry of Health. Now, if you take a look at the quantum of increase, it's 4% increase from the previous budget. Was this what you were expecting? Was this the budget that you were expecting at a time our healthcare systems are being stress tested by a pandemic?
Yes, Malaysia. I must say that my initial response when looking at the numbers looks fairly good. However, when I of course I must say that with that pneumococcal, with that vaccine all in place, I'm more than happy. But when I get to looking at the numbers and the quantum in a more detailed and granular way, I realize that it is not that much after all, because 31.94 billion, actually 31.94 billion. If you deduct the 1.9 billion for contract workers, doctors and whatnot, you realize that you only have 30.04, which is lower than what we gave and allocated for the Ministry of Health in 2020, which is 30.6. And this, in a way, I must say, would reflect in the allocation of the various services, be that medicine, perubatan, be that services of hospital-based, public health, pharmacy, dental, in the entire division, and bahagian, and except for food safety and quality. So I must say that I'm a bit concerned because this year you very well know that many of these cases, whether it's elective surgeries, various departments had been sort of deferred. Therefore, they will all this backlog was supposedly to be handled by 2021, and suddenly you realize that every services, every bahagian, the division, get their allocation deducted. So that is not very welcoming, by the way.
Okay,
I have my concern.
I have my concern. Jump in there. The Malaysian Health Coalition has called for overinvestment in public health as a whole, as well as targeting areas that have suffered systematic underinvestment over the last decades. And Sabah comes to mind. Do you agree with this general approach of overinvestment?
I must say that because we were deficient or we were underspending for the last 1 decade, this is about the best time. Even if there is overspending, is quite okay because our base is quite low in the sense that remember what the Auditor General understaffed, underfunded, overstretched, whatever. So this is the best time. So I could see that there is this 3 billion for vaccine, that's okay. 1 billion for anything that is to do with the COVID thing. But the non-COVID, the NCDs, the entire thing of primary health care, which is, and as well, of course, the hospital-based care. Right. So they all need to be beefed up. And with that 31.94 and actually ending in only 30.4, and UC allocation, it's not much anyway. So that's what I'm concerned, honestly.
Okay. With every budget, there are trade-offs, right? There are competing, requests from different people. There's unemployment to deal with, the economy to deal with, and the pandemic and the healthcare systems to beef up, as you said. Now, were the trade-offs made correctly, in your opinion? I'm looking at some of the announcements that were made. In your point of view, were some of those allocations, should some of those allocations have been funneled into different areas of healthcare, and which areas would you have liked to see more allocation?
Are you saying comparing with other ministries or just healthcare alone?
I'm comparing with other ministries.
All right, I could see that. I could see other ministries like MITI had their allocation, card. But surprisingly, I saw youth and sports somehow, get quite, remain, if not increase, You see, in driving the economy, simply, if you drive the GDP, the growth, you have this factor called C plus I plus G. C is the consumption, I is the investment, and G is the government spending. And you need the I, the investment. MITI is not getting the investment much. And also there was this thing about every ministry for those, allocation of overseas trips. Surprisingly, they are all increased. I mean, why do you need to put, a lot of money in there? So it's always about, what is known as the, in economics, you have cost melepas,
Yes.
So you have this, you would want to see, it's always a competing priorities, as you said. So I hope, overall, you will drive and turn around the economy. But a moratorium, for example, is only given to B40 and the small industries. I'm quite concerned, because you need to have the investment, you need to have the consumption, and don't only look at B40. The M40 and the top 20 also need to spend, and you need them more. They will spend more. They have better capacity to spend, and they have, and there would be more multiplier impact if they spend as opposed to just the B40.
Dr.
So,
Zul,
the range of these are the important things you've got to look into.
Dr. Zul, in the coming days and weeks, there are going to be discussions and debates. What will you be asking the minister? Are there specific details that you want revealed to make a proper assessment of this budget?
All right. Well, specifically in health, besides, of course, the vaccine, the anti-COVID vaccines. And I must say that there are certain things that, my PK, B40 have increased. I mean, allocation by the pneumococcal thing come very nicely, the mental health come very nicely. But more importantly, are those allocations that would have to address this COVID thing, these outbreaks and the outbursts, or the escalation. So capacity to do testing, capacity to do isolation, and especially where disparity are observed, like in Sabah, and their capacity both by way of hospital-based personnel, ICUs and whatnot. So I would want to see details of whether we could really, all those spending would be able to address COVID cases, and more importantly, are the non-COVID cases, which is the NCDs. I see, most of it get cut. I mean, most of it get deducted. No, they are all reduced. And in coming year, in 2021, those cases will then compete with the COVID cases, and the non-communicable diseases, the what's known as the chronic cases, of the greatest killer is still IHD, ischemic heart diseases, cardiovascular diseases. The cardiovascular accident, the CVA is like the strokes, cancer, and whatnot. Those need to be addressed as well. And I want to see more detail as to how it would be able to put it all together, as managing COVID cases and as well the NCDs.
Definitely pertinent points. I really look forward to the debate on this. We too want to hear more clarity on it. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Dr. Zul.
Thanks, Melisa. Thanks, Sharaad.
We're going to take a quick break on Consider This, but there's so much more to discuss on Budget 2021, all coming up in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face masks, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah
Thank you so much for watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan and not forgetting Ibrahim Sani. Ibrahim, let's cross to you. You have another tax update for us. What do you have?
Some of the other comments that have been coming in is from Deloitte Malaysia. Here's Teresa Goh, tax partner over there, sharing her thoughts on the matter.
To make Malaysia as a destination for high-value service activities, some of the incentives that have been announced are, firstly, with regards to Principal Hub. This is an existing incentive which will be expiring end of this year. So the government has announced that conditions will be further relaxed, and this incentive will be extended for another 2 years to 31st December 2022. This is an incentive which attracts the regional headquarters, the regional HQs, to be based in Malaysia. So, and we're hoping that there will be technology transfer. If you have all the heads in Malaysia and hiring Malaysians, the Malaysians will also be learning up the skills of how to run a big MNC. The second one is a new tax incentive called the Global Trading Center, right, will be given. So I wonder if this is going to be similar to what our competitor Singapore already has. So the GTC will be subject to a concessionary rate of tax at 10%. Instead of 24%, it will be at 10%. And this will be for a period of 5 years, and it will be renewable for a period of another 5 years. Now, the third one is there will be a special income tax treatment at a flat rate of 15% for a period of 5 years to non-resident individuals who hold key positions for strategic new investments for companies that will be relocating their operations to Malaysia. So for new companies that will be relocating their operations to Malaysia, the expatriates who are holding key positions will be subject to tax only at 15%. Of course, we have a number of questions here. Will this only be for new companies, new investments that are going to be starting up? Will it also apply to expatriate employees who are non-residents in the Principal Hub, for example, or even in the GTC? So I guess we will have to wait for the details to know. But this is an attractive incentive because non-residents do not enjoy the scale rates that we as residents enjoy, so they are taxed at a higher rate. So the 15% would be attractive for them. I suppose the next question is when you talk about individuals holding key positions. So how many individuals can a company consider to be holding key positions? Is it just, the key post position is for immigration purposes, or you can have more than one key position in a company? Now, other than that, for businesses or manufacturing companies which have relocated or going to relocate their businesses to Malaysia and bring in new investments to Malaysia, the application for the incentive will be extended for another year to 31st December 2022. And the good news is that the scope of tax incentive will be extended also to companies in the selected services sector which have significant multiplier effect. So they must have significant multiplier effect in order to qualify for this incentive. But it's a good incentive because the tax rate is 0 to 10% for a period of 10 years. So this is a good thing, not only for manufacturing, but can be extended to services sector as well.
That was Teresa Goh of Deloitte. Back to you, Mel and Sharaad.
Thanks, Ibrahim. You're turning out to be quite the tax guy on the show tonight. We're going to check back in with you a little bit later. But Datuk Syamsuddin Bardan, Executive Director of the Malaysian Employers Federation, joins us on the show now. Good evening, sir. Business resilience was supposed to be one of the pillars of Budget 2021. Was that really reflected in this budget? Is this the budget that businesses and employers were hoping for?
Yes, I think under the current circumstances, the government had actually done its level best in trying to assist businesses and employers to actually go through the difficult period.
Syamsuddin, let's pick up on some of the details of the help that's been proposed in the budget. One of them is the hiring of fresh graduates, incentives for businesses in terms of 1,000 ringgit paid over 3 months, also I believe 4,000 ringgit which they can claim for rehiring and retraining, right? So is that the kind of thing that we're looking for? And do you think it will work?
Yes, basically, of course, you know, for graduates and to hire people who had been retrenched or had been long time not in employment, I think this incentive will somehow assist employers in trying to hire new employees, especially if you're looking at some recovery of the economy somewhere actually in the first quarter or second quarter of next year. So that I think really assists employers to actually engage these people who are unemployed currently.
Can I ask you to elaborate specifically, what did you see in this budget that you think would be good for business resilience, would be good for employers?
Yeah, of course, if you're looking at the resilience of employees, I think that the wage subsidy is critical for them, especially in the situation where these companies are in the tourism and retail sector, because these are the two sectors that are very badly infected by the COVID-19. And basically, of course, you know, for them, the recovery can be a bit difficult, yeah? And it is where I think when the government extended the wage subsidy program for another 3 months for them, that will be really giving them a kind of lifeline. Well, and also the limitation of 200 employees is now being lifted up to 500 employees.
Okay, Syamsuddin, if I may take you up on that point about the incentives for the tourism industry. Now, earlier today, we had the Malaysian Association of Tour and Travel Agents, MATA, the president of MATA, just commented on the budget, saying that Budget 2021 had failed to provide solid initiatives to protect jobs and businesses in the tourism sector. In fact, he's saying that tourism workers should consider looking for employment in other industries. Do you think that there were sectors and industries that got the short end of the stick in this budget?
No, I would say that, you know, based on the current situation, based on the current circumstances, I think, yes, looking at some kind of limitation of the government's funding, I think that is something that will really assist the group in that sense. Yeah? Otherwise, then they'll be hit in a much harder way and a bigger way. Yeah.
Syamsuddin, what about this, what seems to be a solid policy initiative that is in terms of foreign workers and providing businesses incentives to actually switch out foreign workers for Malaysian workers in those sectors that are heavily, where there's a heavy employment of foreign workers? What do you make of that? Do you think it will actually work? Because we've talked about the difficulties of the Malaysian labour market before. Will those incentives be sufficient to see this real structural change in our economy?
Yes, the COVID-19, of course, is a very challenging period. And of course, you know, in that kind of situation, I would say that the government is trying to actually give the priority of employment to locals. And I would say that somehow the assistance given to the employers and also employees, not just employers here, will actually somehow try to attract some of the local employees to enter sectors that previously they are not willing to go in. So, say for example, you're talking about the security services. The people, of course, the local people are not willing to go to this sector. But if somehow with this scheme, and also with some of the branding of the jobs, say for example, we don't call them as security or jaga anymore, but we call them as auxiliary police, for example. Well, of course, with some training given by the police force, things like that, then I would say we'll be able to attract some of the locals to replace the current employees that are coming from the foreign employees.
Right. So, Dylan, in the minute that we have left, very quick question for you. There's a question around the government's revenue model as a basis for this particular budget. One of the elements of that is increased corporate tax collection. Do you think that's realistic, the levels that the government has projected? Because it's much more than the pre-COVID tax collection levels.
I would say that possibly that is over-ambitious, to say the least, in the sense that even for this year, for example, the IRD had projected that their collection will be somehow reduced by about 1/3. And to actually make a projection of collecting more to a pre-COVID situation, I would say is very ambitious.
Shamsuddin, thank you for speaking with us tonight. I'm sure that you too are still digesting all the announcements that were made in Budget 2021. We're going to take another quick break, but more on Consider This. Stay tuned.
Masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19, social distancing, face masks. Follow these steps, this SOP, with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah gelombang ketiga. Elakkan 3S, iaitu kawasan yang sesak, sempit dan juga bersembang pada jarak yang dekat. Berdisiplinlah kerana virus ini tidak mengira darjat, umur mahupun latar belakang.
As well, who's on the show, Ibrahim, you've got another tax update for us.
Interesting times that we live in right now. Joining us is tax partner of KPMG Malaysia, Tai Lai Kok, sharing his thoughts on the matter.
The Honourable Finance Minister's maiden budget speech with the team, Teguh Kita Menang Bersama. Now this is very notable because it is an expansionary one, despite the fact that the economy is expected to be reducing and contracting by 4.5% this year. Okay, now what is our expectation and what do we see from the budget announcements today? First of all, I think a very interesting one would be the mention of the 400 million contribution by our top glove manufacturers. Many have suggested that these manufacturers should have been subject to a windfall tax, okay, given the fact that they would have enjoyed very, very significant profits during this pandemic. Now, a lot of people are now starting to speculate that this 400 million contribution is in fact the windfall profit tax. So, what do we think? Well, whatever it is a good conclusion, okay, and it probably works out as a good compromise between the glove manufacturers and the government, with the glove manufacturers agreeing to contribute towards vaccine costs and other costs insofar as battling the pandemic. A second issue that probably is going to be very high on everybody's minds will be the shadow economy. Now, the shadow economy obviously are various sectors of the economy which do not register themselves to authorities, who are not paying any taxes, and effectively, to a certain extent, living off you and I. Now, what has the government done insofar as this budget is concerned? Nothing really mentioned in the budget, but we must note that in efforts to curb the spread of smuggling of high-value goods in Malaysia, the government has started to look into bringing together a task force comprising of the MACC and the NFCC, okay, looking towards battling smuggling. Now, would one think that this particular super agency, as we would like to call it, would also be looking towards attacking the shadow economy and making sure the shadow economy is flushed out and they make their necessary contributions to the country? Okay, one will have to see. A third question that most people have brought up, obviously, is the area of GST. Okay, again, plenty of speculation that GST may be making a comeback, and we would see it in this year's budget. Again, truly, insofar as the announcements were concerned, no mention of GST at all. Now, what is the position? Would it ever come back in the near future? I think time will tell. At this point of time, we have the alternative, obviously, the sales tax and service tax. Okay, although, well, personally, in my view, it is not as efficient as a GST, but nevertheless, it is a system in place, and hopefully the government will review the possibilities in the future and think about whether or not it makes sense to bring back GST, okay, but perhaps at a better rate, a lower rate, and make sure that it can be administered much more efficiently than in the past.
That was Tan Lai Kok, the head of tax at KPMG Malaysia, talking about these issues. Back to you, Mel and Sharaad.
Thank you, Ibrahim, and thank you for being on the show with us tonight. Okay, we're going to stay with the subject of tax. Our next guest is Vrinderjit Singh. He's the president of the Malaysian Institute of Accountants. Now, Vrinder, let's stay on the topic of windfall tax. It's been brought up multiple times during the show tonight. Top Glove, Hartalega, Supermax and Kosan all committed to contribute 400 million ringgit to the COVID-19 fight. Do you see this as a substitute to the windfall tax that, you know, it was expected to be announced, but no windfall tax announced? Was this the substitute to a windfall tax? And could a windfall tax have been more than 400 million?
Oh, well, everybody expected a windfall tax, but actually squeezing out a 400 million donation from the glove manufacturers is actually in many ways also a windfall tax. So I think whichever way you want to call it, it is indirectly the same thing.
Except, Verinder, if you look at the numbers, Verinder, isn't it true that we would have, the government would have earned something like 4.8 billion in 2021 from these companies? The loss seems quite staggering between the donation and what was a legitimate demand for taxation.
Agreed. So the question is, if a windfall tax is that used to have something called an excess profits tax in the past and was abolished, and this is for companies who make super profits. And really you're going back to your profits rather than your turnover. So you're right that if you impose a 5% additional tax on top of profits exceeding a certain threshold, you probably get more. But the challenge here is always about if you introduce this suddenly and the perception among the climate among the investors, and that they actually turn off investors. So that's the other subtlety you have to manage. So in the process, you work out an alternative arrangement, small amounts, but who knows, it might continue again in the future. So so long as they do well. So I think it's a compensation. But I just want to remind all of us that we used to have something like a windfall tax called an excess profits tax on all companies who earned super profits in the past. So it might well come back in the future.
And speaking about things that might come back, it was really expected in this budget that GST might have been reintroduced. We haven't heard anything from that.
No.
I want to ask you very quickly about the covering the shortfall from the GST remains a challenge for governments. Has this government and this budget sufficiently dealt with increasing a tax revenue base?
Well, but before that, I think GST was never on the cards. GST will come back in the future, years down the road, right? In terms of revenue, if you look at the projections that the government has made, next year, in 2020, they are expecting an increase from 153 billion to 174 billion for tax revenue. And that's 21 billion extra, all coming from income tax and a little bit from excise duty. So how is that going to happen? And that happens because you're going to have an increased economic growth rate. So profits go up, so taxes go up. So that's the kind of numbers that the government is putting up. So it all depends on how the economy does.
Are these numbers too optimistic in your view?
Yes, they see well over 10%. So increase. So it is optimistic, and it means that there could be aggressive audits done by the tax authorities as well, which normally happens when the economy is an upturn. So is it achievable? Right now, it doesn't look achievable. All depends on how the economy does next year. A bit over-optimistic, but let's see how it goes. So it is not a sustainable tax revenue model. I think that all depends on the kind of tax reforms you're going to introduce. And unfortunately, this is not the right time, so we think next year's budget will be even more exciting than this.
Right.
Verinda, you know, we all recognize that Malaysia's market and its private sector is a major engine for the country. Was enough done for that sector? Did you expect more to be done, or do you think it was sufficient to actually help or give the private sector a kind of helping hand?
Yes, I think a lot of allocations, grants, given. I think you see this every year. And the challenge here is always about the take-up. And there's just too much of detail in the budget, too many allocations, and nobody knows where they'll get it, and they have to search for the information. We have to make it efficient. And this has been one of the criticisms of all past budgets. Where do all these allocations go? How do I find out? Where do I get the conditions? So I think to build an investment climate, you obviously need a lot more. You need to fix a lot of structural issues that we have in this country, but that will take a while. But I think in terms of this particular budget, I think it's just keeping us our heads above the water, and it might just be enough to move along. But remember, we're also relying on global growth in terms of demand and so on, and that can only happen when the pandemic is really curtailed. So we just hope that things will move in that particular direction.
Right. I want to kind of zoom in on one specific incentive that was announced and get your thoughts on it, Verinda. The stamp duty exemption for first-time homeowners that are purchasing properties below 500,000 ringgit. I wanted to ask you whether you felt this incentive actually hit the right mark in terms of the property price bracket and who it might help.
Yes. Again, Melissa, this is not new. It was there already. And then it went off, and then now it's being brought back. So it's same. It's more of the same old stuff that we've had. Does it achieve its particular target? I think you're looking at a 500,000 threshold. So any property from below 500,000 qualifies. So I thought is fine, but I think in the sense the duty is a small figure. So, but I suppose for first-time owners, anything helps, and any little savings is good for them.
Sure. Right.
So I think it's
big question for you, sort of big picture question. Was this a bold, imaginative budget to deal with an extraordinary situation of both a public health crisis, a global public health crisis, and a global recession?
To me, this particular budget had a bit of everything, a smattering of everything to satisfy everybody's palate. Is it extremely bold? No, it's not an extremely bold budget. It's just more of the same that we've had in the past. But I suppose we have limitations, so that's the best we could do. And so it could have been much, much more dramatic. And one of the ways would have been a reduction in corporate tax rates and see how that would have impacted investment flows. That could have been, but it comes with a risk in terms of does the investment flow come in, and therefore you want to lose revenue and so on and so forth. That would have been a big bang approach. A phased corporate tax rate reduction to 20% over a couple of 3-4 years would have been a great opportunity for the government.
Okay, so a missed opportunity. But thank you, Brenda, for speaking with us tonight. We really appreciate your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. This 1 hour episode. Thank you so much for staying with us this whole hour. I'm Melisa Idris.
And also thanks to Ibrahim Sani for all his contributions. I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching and good night.